الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today being the Islamic date of the 22nd of Safar 1445, and it is worthwhile to reflect on this month of Safar that one of the important occurrences to have started in the month of Safar is the hijrah, the migration of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which began on the 26th of the month of Safar. So we are currently on the 22nd of the month of Safar, and on the 26th of Safar, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam began this migration from Makkah al-Mukarramah to Madinatul Munawwara. And incidentally, just looking at the date or the coincidence today being September, the 8th of September, according to the Gregorian calendar, this was the date on which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually began, according to the English calendar, the journey of Hijrah. But obviously the Islamic date is what is paramount in determining the Hijrah. Now, using that as a backdrop, this afternoon I want to reflect a bit on the Hijrah and the wider ramifications of the Hijrah. Because we know that the Hijrah, we all know that the Hijrah is a very well established event in Islamic history. And we all know that the concept of Hijrah, the concept of migration, is something that is well known within Islam. And when we read the seerah, when we read the ahadith, we also have the terminology of the Hijrah on our tongue. So we would say that, these are the Muhajireen, these are the people who emigrated, and these are the Ansar, these are the people who accepted them. We have this terminology and we use it on a regular basis. But sometimes where there might be a shortfall in our understanding is that we purely look at some of these things as historical events. That these are events confined to the past, and we don't seem to find or don't seem to realize that they should and they do have relevance to the present. Now, with that as a backdrop, we would know that in the world today, one of the big talking points for a long period of time, and it's becoming an even bigger talking point in every part of the world, is the issue of refugees. It's the issue of migrants. It's the issue of asylum seekers. It's the issue of so-called foreigners and immigrants. It's a big issue in the West, who to let in, who not to let in. It's an issue in the East with so many Muslims who are affected by the wars, unjust wars that are occurring in so many countries. And it is an issue in the African continent with so many economic migrants. And it is an issue in South Africa with the debates over issues of immigration and xenophobia that occurs. And these kind of issues rear their head even more the closer we come to elections, etc. And we know that an incident occurred very recently within the last 2 weeks here in Johannesburg, and I want to reflect on this incident for a few moments. That we had the fire in Albert Street in Johannesburg, a very devastating incident wherein 77 human beings had passed away. And the scenes that we've got from Johannesburg were extremely distressing. Many people were killed even before the flames came to them because of smoke inhalation. At the end of it, 10 people at least, if not more, burnt beyond recognition. 13 children at least killed in this particular incident. Among them, a 12-month-old baby. And when one hears the eyewitness accounts, one would find that people, out of desperation, had to jump from windows. And some of those who jumped from windows and they were kind of mattresses at the bottom that people put so that they could cushion the landing. Some didn't make it to those mattresses. Some hit the hard concrete. And one would have instances where you could imagine the trauma of a mother just to be able to save a child, throwing a child from the flames of the building to be able to save that particular child. And the firefighters who were there described this as a bomb scene, kind of a huge event that they haven't seen the like of before. And there were those as well who, trying to escape, come to the edge of the building, come to the stairs of the building and find that the gates are closed, and therefore many of them get crushed and pass away as they are trying to escape. And one of the survivors says that when they sleep, now the days after this, they still see flames in their dreams, and they still see the dead bodies occurring in their subconscious mind. Now if we reflect on this, this was not a small incident that occurred. For 77 people to have lost their lives, it is indeed something incredibly huge, and this rightfully made international headlines. We are a community of Muslims in South Africa who are well known for humanitarian outreach in different parts of the world and being aware of the plights of Muslims in different parts of the world. And indeed, Muslims from this community did assist those who were affected in Johannesburg. But I still have to ask the question to myself and others, is an incident of this magnitude did not seem to register the kind of impact that it has, as opposed to when we have other major incidents happening around the world. And this should be a point of introspection. Why is it that we, just on a humanitarian level, did not seem to appreciate the depth and the seriousness of this incident? And normal human beings, enough. That should be enough to be able to trigger our conscience. But to go one step further, it is said that 80% of those people who were affected by this disaster or passed away were Muslims. Were Muslims who were affected. Did we feel that sense of brotherhood? Did we feel that sense of pain by those who were affected by this particular incident? And what has made this incident worse thereafter is obviously the kind of rhetoric from many throughout the political spectrum in South Africa, blaming those who have died in this tragedy and even expressing happiness and satisfaction, Allah forbid, that people have died in such a merciless way. And as part of this introspection, what I want us to look at in these few minutes is, what does Islam teach us regarding these concepts of migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, so-called foreigners, etc. In the society that Rasulullah ﷺ came into, it was all about the tribe. So if you were part of the strong tribe, that means that you had rights. That means that you had access. That means that you were respected. And if you are a nobody in society, you are not attached, you are not part of a major tribe, then you are seen to be somebody that could be trampled, whose rights could be trampled upon. And in our world today, we have a parallel of this, in that the system that the world runs by, the system of nation states, if a person has a passport, a person has access. A person is considered worthier than a person who doesn't have a passport. And with that you have access to services, with that you are considered to be a person of worth, without that you are considered to be a lesser human being, a second class or a third class citizen. Islam, on the other hand, teaches us وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that every human being has intrinsic worth in the sight of Allah. And no color, no tribe, no document would make one person greater than another person. And the only determining criteria is whether a person has taqwa. That is what increases the intrinsic worth of a person. Islam teaches us further that migration is inevitable as human beings. That people would have to move from town to town due to circumstances. People would have to move from rural areas to city areas. People would move from country to country. These are part of the way human beings live. The greatest of Anbiya had to migrate. Ebrahim alayhi salam had to migrate when he was persecuted in his land. Lut alayhi salam, his nephew. Moosa alayhi salam. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam himself, going from Makkah al-Mukarramah to Madinah al-Munawwara. The Sahaba before him, the first migration from Makkah al-Mukarramah to Abyssinia, and so forth. And another principle we learn in this deen is Innal arda lillah. That unlike the concept that is so common in society and on our tongues as well, that South Africa is for South Africans. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Innal arda lillah. That the earth belongs to Allah. That nobody can claim, to have exclusive rights over another group of people in a particular domain, because the land is what belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we also need to question our own selves in that while we, whoever it may be, might consider ourselves as an established group and we look at others as outsiders, was it not, just one or two generations back for some of us, that the exact same things that we see people having to cross borders, take risks to come across, sometimes not have the same documentation, our great-grandparents would have to make the same kind of journeys to come and settle in a different land. So it could have just been us. It's just a few generations later, and it is somebody else who has to take these risks to come and settle in a different land. How many of those who have settled are actually very well established people in their own societies in terms of qualifications, in terms of social prestige, but have been forced out of circumstances to come to a land like this? And that's why one of the commentators discussing this particular event and what had happened in Johannesburg says that this tendency in society for us to always not look at the humanity, not look at the pain that people are feeling and point fingers at those who are suffering. He says that those who prosper while others suffer tend to be confident of their virtue. They tend to blame those who suffer for their suffering. And they say that people who are suffering, people who have gone through a tragedy, they're suffering because they are criminals, because they're stupid, because they're ignorant, because they're weak, because they're drunk, because they're lazy, etc. And if we really have to study the situation, it is a lot more complicated than this. I mentioned that the hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had started in this month of Safar. Let us towards the end draw a few lessons from some incidents from the hijrah. One of the incidents we have is Sayyidina Suhaib radiallahu anhu. He was not an Arab. He was somebody, if you could say, a foreigner in Makkah al-Mukarramah who had become a Muslim. He was from the European lands. And when he is making hijrah from Makkah to Medina, the Quraysh catch him, they apprehend him. And the Quraysh tell him that you came here to this society as a poor person and now you made money out of us and you are running away rich. And doesn't that sound familiar? That's common, that people are stealing our jobs, people are stealing our money. This is the attitude of racism that was expressed by the Quraysh as well, which is against the teachings of Islam. So Sayyidina Suhaib radiallahu anhu, in this moment of migration, he says, I can fight you and I will beat you. I can shoot an arrow better than any of you. I can take my sword and I will fight you to death. But let's leave all of that out. Let me go. If you want, whatever money I've made here in Makkah al-Mukarramah, I will leave it behind and I will go penniless. This was the sacrifice he made. I will go penniless to Madinah al-Munawwara. And in that way he went to Madinah al-Munawwara with nothing, despite having established himself in Makkah, now having to re-establish himself in Madinah al-Munawwara. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam hears of this incident of Suhaib radiallahu anhu, and he says, Rabiha Suhaib, that Suhaib, in this transaction he made, he left everything behind. He has been most successful and his transaction has been most profitable. And it's no doubt that because of different ways, because of a seeming battle over resources, everywhere in the world there's attention. between the people who have been living for longer in that land and people who come from outside. Nabi of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us, unlike what happens in the world today, to deal with the problem, let us put more laws, let us make it more stringent, let us pay more bribes, let's deport people, let's put them in refugee camps, etc. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught the concept of muakhat, which is such a great concept to be able to bond hearts together. What was a muakhat? A muhajir, somebody from Makkah, he comes to Medina, and a family, the Ansari in Medina, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam pairs them up. And the Ansari was willing to share his home, provide lodging for the one who comes in. The Ansari was willing to share his food for the Muhajir, the one who comes in. It's difficult for us to imagine because we live so individualistic lives. But this was what was done happily in Madinatul Munawwara by the Muhajirin and the Ansar. So much so that some of the Muhajirin, or the Ansar rather, they said to the Muhajirs, half of my farm is yours. This is half of a thriving business. Half is yours. Half of this date plantation is yours. Half of this house, I will divide this house in half. Half of this house is yours. I have 2 wives. I'm willing to divorce one wife and I'm willing to give you another wife. This was the extent to which the Muhajirin, the Ansar had went. And one of these examples we have is the example of Sayyidina Abdurrahman ibn Auf. So he was a Muhajir. He comes to Medina and the person he's paired up with is Sayyidina Sa'ad ibn Rabi, an Ansari. And Sayyidina Sa'ad offers him the same, half of the house. You can marry one of my wives if you want. You can take half of my wealth. And then so you see the Ansar on the one hand, such glowing qualities. But you see on the other hand, the Muhajir in the form of Sayyidina Abdurrahman bin Auf. He says, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you in your wealth. I don't want any of your wealth. Show me the marketplace. I will go and I will seek a halal livelihood. And within a short period of time, he became a millionaire, no, a billionaire of Madinatul Munawwara. What we learn from this, in conclusion, is this example of the Muhajirin and the Ansar and the Muakhat is something that is relevant for these problems of refugees and migrants in society. It's also relevant in terms of a underprivileged community and a more established community, for these communities to work together. We also learn from the example of Sayyidina Abdurrahman bin Auf that the immigrant community was willing to make dua and be thankful to the host community. And they tried to be independent. It wasn't a case of perpetual handouts, but we also tried to be independent. There was a concept of, let us watch our language, all these artificial differences are much more weaker than the connection of Iman, that Iman is stronger than laws, and Iman is stronger than artificial names and titles. Iman is stronger than even blood. And the other lesson that we learn is that the Ansar helped the Muhajirin. They did not exploit the Muhajirin. Sometimes we'd see people who are of a lesser status, lesser wealth. They don't have any family, they don't have any documents. So we would use that to exploit them for cheap labor, to take more work out of them, to pay them less. This wasn't the way of the Ansar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ تَبَوَّأُوا الدَّارَ وَالْإِيمَانَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. Speaking about the Ansar, some qualities we can bring. يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ. They loved those, they didn't hate, they loved those who migrated towards them. يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَا يَجِدُونَ فِي صُدُورِهِمْ حَاجَةً مِمَّا أُوتُوا. They didn't have any desire if these people were going to get any wealth or booty in the battles. They didn't have any desire for their wealth. وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. They gave preference to others over themselves. وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةً. Even if they were needy themselves, sometimes the Ansar, they gave the others preference over them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ. Whoever overcomes the stinginess and self-interest within oneself, أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. They are the successful ones. Great lessons. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to imbibe all of these lessons to be able to deal with some of these wider challenges facing us as communities and societies. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah.